If Donald Trump's threats are real, Canada has just hours to secure a trade deal with the U.S. The deadline, midnight Eastern. Canada's negotiating team remains in Washington. Officials have been tight-lipped, but the U.S. president is speaking out. Overnight, he said Canada's plan to recognize Palestine would make it very hard to negotiate a trade deal. This afternoon, though, he said it may not be a deal breaker.
Well, we're going to see. No, I didn't like what they said, but, that's their opinion. I didn't like that. Not a deal breaker, but we haven't spoken to Canada today. He's called, and we'll see. But we have made a few deals today that are excellent deals for the country. We're taking in literally trillions of dollars for the country. This is making our country very rich and respected again.
CBC senior business reporter Peter Armstrong is tracking developments from Washington, and he joins us now live. And what do we know, Peter, about where things stand right now?
We're getting a little bit of breaking news out of the White House right now, and this is literally just moving across the wires, Ian. So I don't have a ton of information, but the wires read, Trump signed an executive order increasing tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, with higher tariffs set to go into effect on August 1st, which is 5 hours from now. So through the day, we've been waiting to hear from the president. He has all of these executive orders that he needs to sign on the deals that he's made, on the deals that he hasn't made. If he wants to kick that new tariff rate into action by August 1st, he had to sign an executive order. He has to get that executive order to the officials at the Customs and Border that actually implement the new tariff rate. So now we're being told out of the White House, the president has signed that. He has increased the rate from 25% to 35%. It is important for everybody listening and watching to understand what that means. That 25% rate is one that has been in place. This is the so-called fentanyl tariffs, the first round of tariffs that he imposed. But then they said anything that is CUSMA compliant, anything that is compliant with the Canada-US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement, that would be exempt from all of this. So that is the rate that is going from 25% to 35%. The fact is, the Bank of Canada crunched the numbers, and we got their latest forecast yesterday. 95% of the goods that are sent from Canada into the United States are covered under that CUSMA deal. They are CUSMA compliant. So only about 5% of goods coming into the United States will pay this new higher rate. And if you sort of look at what is actually paid by whom, at what level across the country on all the different various products, the Bank of Canada says that rate comes all the way down from 25 to about 5%. It'll be interesting to see what the math means, how much that 5% goes up now that we've gone from 25 to 35. This is not what Canada wanted, but this is a very real outcome that we're worried about happening today. And now, according to the White House, it has indeed happened.
The Democrats saying about all of this?
Look, there's so much backing and forthing about what this means and what this will look like going forward. I've been thinking a lot about how they feel about it as this is, I think, my fourth or fifth time down in Washington. Every time there's a trade deadline to worry about, I come down and try to get a sense of what's happening on the ground here. And on this trip, for the first time, I'm hearing from Americans that they are actually getting a sense that not only are Canadians upset, but that they're upset that anger out of Canada might have an impact here. Tim Kaine was speaking about that earlier today. Just take a quick listen to what he had to say.
We've got businesses now, or consumers in Canada, for example, they will not buy American products. They will not travel to the U.S. because they're so mad about the disrespect that is being visited upon them by Trump. So there's a triple level effect of raising the costs of imports, leading to retaliatory effects, and then a reputational effect that's really socking our people.
Meanwhile, Ian, I'm just getting a little bit more information. We actually have the full release from the White House on this announcement that they are indeed going from 25% to 35% to effectively address the existing emergency. They're still talking about the fentanyl crisis there. Goods transshipped to evade the 35% tariff. So if you take something and ship it to Scotland and then send it back in, that would be paid at a 40% transshipment tariff on top of the 35%. So we are getting more information, but this is literally just happening as I sat down to come on air with you.
Yeah, so let me ask you a couple of quick follow-up questions, Peter, if I may. So that paper you have now about this higher tariff, is that a done deal, or might that still change between now and midnight?
Therein lies a $1 trillion question. It's a done deal. This executive order now goes to the customs agents that will actually come up with a tariff code and put this out. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about how hard this is becoming for the people that actually manage all of the various tariff codes and what this means for shipping. That process is now underway. That does not undermine the ability of a deal to be struck before midnight or by noon tomorrow or whatever it may be. And I would imagine there will be attempts at conversations. We had heard from Trump said earlier today that he had not heard from the Canadians. We presume that he meant that he hadn't talked to the Prime Minister, that they had not heard from the Canadians, that the Prime Minister had called them to try to reach out. But look, there could be ongoing negotiations. But as far as the Americans are concerned, this new tariff is in effect and will be applied as of midnight tonight.
And one other thing I want to ask you, you were talking, I didn't quite follow the numbers when you said whatever the tariff is for the non-CUSMA compliant goods, that overall that would be 5%. So if you have like 25 or 35% for the non-CUSMA compliant things, so I understand that. Where did the 5% come in?
So the Bank of Canada, most of the major economics groups in the country, the Royal Bank of Canada Economics did a really good study where they just went through the customs, the census data that actually collects all of this and said what products are coming from Canada into the United States and what is the actual rate they're paying, because it depends on this part of a product is tariffed at a higher rate, this part of that product is tariffed at a lower rate, and they said the effective average tariff rate across the country was as low as 2.3% in April. The Bank of Canada came out and said when they looked at those numbers a little bit later on in time, more recently, they say that average is probably closer to 5%. But the main thing is that 95%, the vast, vast majority of goods that are shipped from Canada into the United States are covered under that CUSMA compliance. They're exempt from these tariffs. They're exempt from this increase that goes up as well. But there are all kinds of products, Ian, that aren't covered under CUSMA. And I'll give you an example of, if you have a product you've been shipping into the United States and it was covered under a previous deal, under a World Trade Organization tariff regime, the most favored nation, that, you had to pay a 0.6 or a 1.4% tariff. And you didn't have to go through to do all the paperwork to become CUSMA compliant. That is now getting tariffed at that much higher rate. So we've seen this huge rush of companies trying to get all of their products covered under CUSMA and going through the paperwork to get it CUSMA compliant. But that hasn't all happened yet. But we're told the vast, vast majority, 95%, according to the Bank of Canada, of products shipped from Canada into the United States are indeed, as of today, CUSMA compliant.
Nobody does live business reporting better than you, Peter. Glad you're on this story, and I think we're going to come knocking again next hour as we try to figure out where things are and where they're headed. Peter Armstrong, live in Washington. Laurie Williams is a political analyst and a professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary. And Professor Williams, as you may have just heard, things are changing, or maybe they're not. Maybe we still are going to see something change by midnight Eastern time. But do you have any sense of optimism that some kind of deal can be hammered out between now and then?
I don't know that the question is whether it can be hammered out in the next few hours, and I'm not sure that that's the goal. As we've heard from the Prime Minister many times, the goal is to have as good a deal as possible out of this, and that if that means a week or a month of tariffs at a higher rate, then they're willing to actually hammer out a better deal. Again, it's important to remember how much is already covered under the CUSMA agreement. And so the impact on Canada's economy as a whole will not be as significant as that additional 10% would suggest. On the other hand, there's those industries that are affected are being really hit hard. They were struggling already, and this is going to make this difficult, if not impossible.
I know no one can get clear answers on this when it comes to the Trump administration, but Mexico got an extension today. Do you see that as a possibility for Canada?
Well, given that the executive order has been signed, perhaps Perhaps not. But again, there's always the possibility. This is under the president's discretion. There is a possibility of an extension. And certainly we have seen that that's been the norm since the announcement in January of tariffs coming. They have been postponed repeatedly. So there is a possibility of it being postponed, suspended, imposed, and then walked back temporarily. It's very difficult to predict what the president is going to say at one time or the other about this. The long game is what everybody's looking at. We're seeing pressure being placed on legislators in the United States, consumers in the United States, people who vote, those who have influence on Donald Trump directly. And those levers will continue to be worked to the extent that they can be to try to move things in a more positive direction. But whatever positive happens one day could be reversed another day, just because we've got a very unpredictable administration.
Yeah, and listen, one last thing. Outside of the CUSMA umbrella, are there any industries in particular that may be of the greatest concern or at greatest risk of suffering under these increased tariffs?
Well, we know, for example, aluminum, steel. We know that the auto industry on this side of the border and the other side of the border, some of those things are being affected by all of this. And so those that have already been hurt and the jobs that are affected by that, or the provinces that are more vulnerable to job losses in those sectors, all of them will feel this worse than they did before this news came out, and their hope is that something will be done to relieve their struggles.
All right. Professor Williams, thank you so much. Laurie Williams, a political analyst and professor at Mount Royal University. Okay, we're going to stay on this story over the next 2 hours. I just want to reiterate what Peter Armstrong was reading live on the air. We have a copy of it here as well. This is what the Trump administration released just minutes ago, and basically an executive order increasing the tariff on Canada from 25% to 35%, with this higher tariff set to go into effect on August 1st, 2025. As you've just heard, there are lots of complications. For example, here's one. Goods transshipped to evade the 35% tariff will be subject instead to a transshipment tariff of 40%. So we'll continue to study this and get you analysis, and also see whether there are negotiations going on now that might change this before the midnight deadline that the Trump administration has imposed.